I don't think anyone should be surprised that any of the Harry Potter kids have come out and proved to be really fine actors. They did, after all, go to the world's best and most unique acting school for their entire childhood.
Yeah.
And get a chance to watch, actors like Alan Rickman and Emma Thompson, and Michael Gambon shape character. Kenneth Branagh.
Oh, and Ray Fiennes. It was like the entire British equity worked on those films.
Yeah, and no, I don't think any set of young actors in history have ever had a chance to work with so many incredibly gifted, incredibly accomplished professors. Mm-hmm. So I don't really think it's all that strange that a lot of these kids, not just Dan, but not even just Emma Watson and Rupert Grint. Even some of the smaller characters, have sort of stepped forward and we're starting to see the suggestion of really interesting careers from these kids.
Yeah.
And that's all. I think that's all wonderful. I do think in the case of Dan, this is a guy, who has worked his craft very, very hard. That he really would like to explore more as an artist than just Harry Potter, and he knows that he can't just glide on that.
Right.
And he's put in the work, and I think, and in a lot of ways, I think that Horns is the best evidence of that. That he has really, of what he can do, of his tremendous emotional range. I think there's this whole generation of amazing British actors like Benedict Cumberbatch and Tom Hiddleston, and yeah, and I think Dan is right in there with the best of them. That he's if you look at this sort of elite set of young, kind of amazing English actors, Dan is head and shoulders with all of them. So,
well, he brings something to Ig. It's interesting because the character is someone who's been accused of murder, but you still have to be on side with that character, even though there's a potential murder, even though he drinks a bit too much, even though he does, at the not the ceremony, the candlelight vigil, he does a terrible thing there, and that's what leads directly to the horns growing, and all that stuff, and then he has horns.
He blasphemes.
He sure does, and so you have to be on side with him, otherwise the movie won't work.
Yeah,
I think he brings that.
He is tremendously sympathetic. The other thing is, it's not like, I had a chance to spend a couple days with Dan. I wouldn't pretend to know him really well,
right.
But I do think that one thing that's helped him tremendously is that he has this sense of humor,
right.
And and that's one of the things which makes the character sympathetic. But he also he has that off screen. He has a tremendous sense of humor about himself. And about his work, and I think a sense of humor makes people tough.
Well,
it becomes a person with a sense of humor about themselves is wearing armor, and also a sense of comedy can be a bludgeon to bash at the world. And I think Dan has that. I think that he has terrific comic timing, and those are things that very much work to his advantage in Horns, and especially in the first third, which is almost like this kind of bewildering, dizzying black comedy.
Well, it is, and I loved the scene when he first goes to the doctor's office.
Yeah.
And the little girl says, "I want to burn Mummy in bed with matches," and that sort of thing. And everyone starts confessing, and there's that weird off-kilter moment when you don't really exactly understand what's happening. Is this a fantasy? Is this really happening? Is it? And it's bewildering to him. It was a little bewildering to me. I was like, what's going to happen next, And
he's in there with the doctor, and the doctor, he's, and the doctor is, talking about all the wicked things he'd like to do, and you know, and Ig keeps trying to bring it back to the horns on his head, and then finally the doctor says in frustration, you know, patience, all you think about is yourself.
And that's funny.
Yeah.
You know, so when you were writing the original novel version of this, was there a question in your head about delivering a sort of a balance between the darker elements, the religious element, the humor, all that, or do you just let the story kind of flow and figure out the details later?
Yeah, the book is a really unhappy, paranoid novel by a really unhappy, paranoid man. I wasn't in a great place mentally when I wrote it, and you know, it makes me nuts. You hear these indie rock groups, you know, where someone will say, "I don't know how anyone can enjoy that album. I was in so much emotional pain when I wrote it," you know, and I always kind of want to slap a guy like that upside the head, you know. I mean, it's a rock album, you know. I mean, of course, people are going to want to dance. But I sort of get it a little bit. I'm very proud of Horns. I think it's a really fun novel. I mean, that's a strange thing to say about it, but I think it's a really fun novel. But it was hard to write, and I was a hard person to be around and not very happy with myself. And I had this tremendous success with Heart-Shaped Box. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I fell into that cliché, the second novel trap, where when I wrote 400 pages of a novel that I threw away.
Wow.
It was called The Surrealist Glass, and it just didn't work. It was no good. Although, in some ways, The Surrealist Glass was the first rough draft of Horns, because there were ideas and elements and even one or two chapters that were almost lifted wholesale from The Surrealist Glass. Right. And slotted into Horns.
Was that a learning experience for you? Taking something that you work on at 400 pages, that's a substantial amount of work to say, you know what, enough, I'm walking away from it. Do you learn something from that?
Well, yes, but I think, I mean, you know, at some point following up Heart-Shaped Box, at some point, you know, a year or two after Heart-Shaped Box came out, and I was, you know, looking at The Surrealist Glass and thinking what a terrible wreck it was, I thought to myself very clearly, you know, I don't care if I never have another novel, right, but I don't want to publish a piece of junk just to be published. You know, I don't care if I have to, you know, I don't care if I can't complete my contract and I have to give money back. I don't care where we go. If there's going to be a second book, it's going to be a second book I love. Right. It's not going to be a second book that I think is a mess, you know, that's just a contract filler. And I actually think that was a helpful decision for me, yeah. You know, because it gave me a chance to get a little quiet inside, you know, to kind of stand back and say, well, everything I'm doing is terrible. I'm just going to stop doing things for a little bit. And I took a little time mentally. And then one day the devil walked into my life.
In what sense?
Well, just that you know, I had ideas that wouldn't gel,
right?
And you know, The Surrealist Glass, it wouldn't gel. There were some characters and ideas there that were interesting, but it just felt like not good. It just felt like not a book people would enjoy reading.
Right.
And then, and it seemed to me, you know, after I took a little time off, it seemed to me the thing the book had been missing was the devil. You know, that maybe you don't have a story until the devil walks on stage.
Right.
You need a character who's planted in the middle of the story, who will tempt people and threaten them and frighten them a little bit and cause them to take action, to scurry about to defend themselves or you know, to beg or bargain their way out of the trouble that the devil represents.
Right. Well, it's interesting because I think of you know, the other stories, other movies and books that feature the devil, and often the devil doesn't appear. There's a great Ken Russell movie called The Devils, and I don't know if you've ever seen this movie. No. If you haven't, find it. You'll love it. Okay. And, but it's the story of a priest who was accused of being possessed by the devil in France in 1632. It's based on a true story. And the idea of the devil doesn't actually appear anywhere, but the idea of the devil is very much a character in the film, even though there is no one character that you could say that's the devil. Just the ideas that come along with the idea of the devil. are very
Yeah.
important.
Well, the best scene in the movie, I think, is the scene where Ig and his beloved Marin break up in a diner.
Yeah.
I think it's a very emotionally intense scene, and there's this moment when he says to her, he believes she's seeing someone else, and he says to her, you know, how far has it gone? I want to know everything. You know, tell me everything. I want to know every dirty little secret. And she says, why? And he says, because it will make it easier to hate you.
Right.
And that's sort of the question at the center of the story. If you knew the worst about the people in your life, if you knew their secrets, and you knew the worst things they thought, would you still be able to love them? Would it destroy you? What would it do to you to know everything that people try to hide about themselves? Because everyone does have their own corner of darkness.
Yeah.
And you know, at some point, when I was a young guy, you know, when I was in my 20s, I read a review of some science fiction movie, and the critic said a really interesting thing. He said, this movie doesn't quite succeed, and the reason why is it isn't about anything except itself. And that was like such an enigmatic sentence, and I kind of went over it and over it in my head. What does that mean? It wasn't about anything except itself. And gradually I kind of came to feel like he was telling me something, that this critic had tapped into something important. You know, the science fiction film he was talking about, it was a prequel to a well-known franchise, and it was something like, you know, just trade federations and robots blowing each other up, and it wasn't about anything except, you know, laser guns and robots.
Right.
It didn't ask any interesting questions about why people live the lives the way they do, and it didn't ask anything like, you know, any of the great sort of almost unanswerable questions people turn to fiction to explore. And you know, one thing I always look for in a story is for it to have some kind of an internal life, to be about something more than just a ghost or a vampire or a devil, to ask some kind of interesting question or explore some interesting territory so that it's about something bigger than itself. You know, and that's very possible to do in fantasy. I mean, every ghost story is a chance to explore the way the past never really goes away.
Right.
The way the past keeps bleeding into the present. And I think, you know, I think any story about the devil is the same way, which is, you know, what happens when all the dirty secrets come out, and what would it be like to be tempted by the things you want most?
Well, see, I think all the best genre movies, whether it's a sports movie or a sci-fi movie or whatever, they're never actually about the sport or the thing. They're always a larger comment on the good ones, anyway, or a larger comment on the human condition somehow.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. You know, the thing about The Godfather is most people don't come from families where the family business is enforcing your will at the end of a Tommy gun.
Right.
But a lot of people know what it's like to be in a family situation like the family situation that faces the Corleones.
Right.
You know, a lot of people have had that immigrant experience of carving out a new territory, and a lot of sons of powerful men have had that experience of trying to figure out how to define themselves, how to create their own character and identity that's discrete and stands apart from, you know, their father, who may be a godfather.